Ayubowan everyone. Welcome to the Ironbloods Institute. This is the second episode of the series, Our Elites Just Suck. This is a series where we explain why our current elites suck and are so bad at doing their job. In part 1 of the series, we discussed the root cause of the Sri Lankan crisis, which was the usage of the neoliberal economic model by all regimes since 1977. It is common knowledge that borrowers become the lender's slave. In this episode, we are going to see who really owns Sri Lanka's debt and thus controls the nation by proxy. Unlike most Western media screaming from the rooftops about Chinese debt traps and such nonsense, as usual, we will go to the roots of this issue. Our first order of business is to look at some definitions as usual. Words are powerful not because they are merely glorified sounds that we emit from our vocal cords, but because they affect the way we think and view the world. A central bank is a financial institution which has been given a monopoly over the production of money and debt in a nation or group of states. According to the EU and most common legal definitions, investment funds are essentially pools of money collected from various investors with the purpose of increasing its value over time by investing in stocks, bonds, and other securities. These definitions are self-explanatory, and it makes it abundantly clear what funds and central banks are. Now let's take a look at what they fundamentally do. You must be wondering to yourself, what does any of this have to do with Sri Lanka's proxy rulers and puppeteers? But I promise, this will be worth your time. These are the major functions of a central bank and an investment fund. A central bank acts as a foreign currency reserve and a lender of last resort to commercial banks. An investment fund reduces the risk of investing and aims to grow its capital via a good investment portfolio. Without telling you what they are, I extracted the functions of two famous financial institutions from the About Us page of their websites. The first says it acts sort of as a lender of last resort to countries that are facing financial troubles. It also lends out foreign currency to its member nations that may be running out of important foreign currency, similar to how Sri Lanka ran out of US dollars in Q1 of 2022. Doesn't this sound familiar? Almost like a central bank for central banks of countries facing financial calamities. Did you guess what this institution is? Ding ding ding! Congratulations if you guessed the IMF. Yes, the IMF or the International Monetary Fund acts sort of as a central bank to central banks of countries in crisis. Remember we discussed that a fund aims to reduce risk and grow its capital via a good investment portfolio? It is well known that lending to governments is usually a safe investment. This is why even in Sri Lanka, treasury bills and treasury bonds are the next preferred investment alternative to fixed deposits in banks. The second institution says that it invests in safe government financing and lends funds to projects that deliver definite results. Sounds an awful like what a traditional investment fund aims to do, correct? What do you think this institution is called? I admit this is a bit of a hard one, but if you guessed, you're awesome. Yes, the financial institution that does investments like this is the World Bank. The World Bank acts a lot like a fund. Now, I can almost hear the questions that must be going on in your head. All I can say is yes, the International Monetary Fund acts more like a bank, while the World Bank acts more like a fund. Confusing, isn't it? But that's how it is. Let's dive a little deeper on how this happened. 1 year before the end of World War II, the Bretton Woods Conference was convened. The world powers of the time decided to establish some institutions to oversee the post-war reconstruction and cooperation. The United Nations, for example, was one of these institutions. Under the intellectual leadership of renowned economists Maynard Keynes and Dexter White, both involved heavily in the treasury departments of the UK and USA respectively, the World Bank and the IMF was established to aid the success of the aforementioned goals. Nonetheless, there seems to have been some hiccups on the way. As pointed out on the IMF's own website, Keynes himself had described the two institutions as follows. The bank is a fund and the fund is a bank. Since the IMF and the World Bank play such a key role in national banking and funding, even in Sri Lanka, let's explore who controls them. As you can see from this pie chart, the USA, Japan, and other Western allies in the EU dominate the IMF. The only counterweight is China, which also holds a significant stake at 6% in the bank. This pie chart shows the major shareholders of the World Bank. But it doesn't matter because, as mentioned on their own website, the USA holds veto power on decisions made in the World Bank. Even if it didn't, the USA, along with Japan and its Western allies, have significant power to shape the World Bank's decision making. Now, I know this segment was a little long, but if you have no interest in banking, you are not alone. Consequently, we arrive at the core part of this video. Who owns Sri Lanka's debt and controls it by proxy? If you Google Sri Lanka's foreign debt, you will see images like this. This data itself was supplied by the CBSL. Of our total debt borrowed via sovereign bonds is around 47% of the total and accounts for the biggest slice in the pie. These were the foreign currency injections used to prop up our economy since 2007, which I mentioned in the first video in this series. Apart from these, the rest consists mainly of bilateral loans from institutions like the World Bank and the Asia Development Bank, and countries like India, China, and Japan. Next, turn your attention to the borrowings done on the international financial markets via our sovereign bonds. If you notice, the biggest holders of our sovereign bonds are Western financial institutions like BlackRock, Allianz, HSBC, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and Credit Suisse. This will matter later, but pay attention to the investment value of the bonds they hold, the second column in the table. Keep in mind, this is in millions of US dollars, mind you. Using data gathered on the Bloomberg Financial Portal by Advocata Institute Sri Lanka, I have categorized the top 20 holders of Sri Lankan international sovereign bonds by country and by type of institution. Put in this format, a majority of the financial institutions that hold a significant portion of Sri Lanka's debt are from the USA, UK, Switzerland, Germany, Denmark, Italy, Sweden, France, and Canada. The glaring commonality of all of these is that all of these are Western nations which bows to the neoliberal hegemony of the USA. The simple conclusion here is that the West and its financial institutions hold a lion's share, pun intended, of Sri Lanka's sovereign bonds. Again, this will matter later, but let's move on. The investment fund, known as the World Bank, holds around 9% of Sri Lanka's debt. As we saw earlier in the video, their website itself educates us on how the United States is the only shareholder that has veto power in the decision-making process of the World Bank to this day. The Asia Development Bank, too, is largely a vehicle of US soft power, as described by the neoconservative Washington, D.C.-based think tank, the Center for Strategic and International Studies. They hold around 13%. The Quad, or the Quadrilateral Security Agreement, was launched in 2007, but relaunched again in 2017 with Japan taking the lead. It is well known that the Quad seeks to contain China via diplomatic and military agreements between its member nations, USA, Japan, India, and Australia. Consequently, Japan, India, and China are the remaining holders of Sri Lanka's debt. Of these three, India and Japan have allied with the West, that is, USA and Australia, posing a huge risk to Sri Lanka's sovereignty. If all these are added together, 81% of Sri Lanka's debt is either controlled by countries in the West or allied to the West. So, tying it all together, what is the final result of over 80% of our debt being controlled by the West? It is simple. Following the age-old logic, the borrower becomes the lender's slave. We won't be able to have any independent policy in any form, regardless if they are economic, military, or foreign policy. Western financial interests now control the very sovereignty of this nation because they can demand from us virtually anything to pay back these debts. For over 200 years, the West plundered the wealth of nations like us to the tune of trillions of US dollars. And now, they continue to do the same, albeit through more duplicitous means. Instead of chains of iron, they now chain us with debt and usury. Instead of armies, they now use bankers. How do you think the West built up its huge cities? The Royal Pavilions of Brighton, the cities of stone in London, St. Peter's Basilica in Italy, the La Sagrada Familia in Spain, the Eiffel Tower in France. They did it all from the wealth generated from enslaving us, the global south, via their colonial empires. And now they have the gall to lecture us about human rights. What a bunch of hypocrites. Just like when Shylock asked for his pound of flesh, now these duplicitous bankers are salivating to carve up our nation. Their greed knows no bounds, and our sleazy politicians are ready to give them what they demand. Remember our 207 years of humiliation, when our own nobles, elites, and so-called deservers betrayed the king, the nation, and every man, woman, and child, allowing Britain to annex this country. Now, the only question that remains is Sri Lankans. Will you let them? That's the end of the second episode of the series, Our Elites Just Suck. In our next episode, we are going to discuss the second reason for Sri Lanka's crisis, the gross incompetence and ignorance of our elites. If you found this video informative, please like and subscribe to make the algorithm gods happy. Share this video with your friends and leave me a comment if I've made any errors or if you just want to say hi. Thanks for watching.